What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. Season 14 goes live today with Hazard, and we've got an update on Overwatch Classic. Aaron Keller tweets this out: with Overwatch Classic's first run over, I wanted to give a glimpse of how it did and give a framework for analyzing upcoming 6v6 tests. Importantly, those are coming later in Season 14. We look at player engagement in different ways. Two of the bigger ones are in the percentage of our audience and the percentage of hours played in a mode. When Classic launched, 36% of all player hours were in that mode. Okay, so over a third of all playtime was in Overwatch Classic. That's pretty crazy. But after 3 weeks of play, that number had dropped to about 4%. This is pretty standard for an event mode at the end of its run. I think especially as the meta was starting to be figured out, a cool and maybe interesting phenomenon was like Widowmaker gameplay got insane in Overwatch Classic, which I think was less common in actual 2016, where there was just less skill in the player base overall. As players have developed, like, we figure out patches really quick and we exploit some of the highest skill ceiling heroes really quickly as well. He goes on, the other metric, percent of players, saw 71% of all players try the mode at least once on launch day. This number fell to about 11% by the end of Classic. This fall off is normal, but having 11% of players continue to engage made this our fourth most popular mode at the time. I think this is key because when they break down play statistics like this, they start to wonder, like, can it compete up against some of the staple modes of the entire game? And if it's holding at 11%, even on the Classic launch day patch, that's pretty significant, and I think would be positive data for them to consider keeping it long term. Let's move on. He says, overall, we're really happy with how well Classic did, and we're excited to bring back it again in Season 14 with a different time period from the original game highlighted. We're not quite ready to talk about the exact date, but expect it soon. Wait, why didn't he say soon TM? I feel like he missed an opportunity there. But one criticism I did have about Classic is they sort of made it seem like week to week they're going to have different patches from history. They've already stated with the previous blog post that the next one is going to be the Moth meta, which is a quite controversial one. On one hand, Brig is considered the hero that killed the game and was the most OP support, but that's the one they left unnerfed the longest. The height of the Moth meta, Mercy, was insane. I have plenty more to talk about with that when that's coming closer, but that's the next one we're going to get. And then I guess the next iteration of Overwatch Classic will be the GOATS patch. The success of this mode really yields to me a belief about the longevity of Overwatch to be all about play formats, whether it's hero ban, draft, because if you think about it, a retro patch is just like if all of the new content was banned, or we just put it to a very different, even unbalanced version of the game. People have maybe more fun in that rather than the hyper competitive, super up-to-date balanced version with everything in it always. That's not necessarily the objective, most fun way to play, or even the most interesting. But keep in mind that the 6v6 tests are coming down the pipeline, and we're really going to want to put as much play data as possible into the serious 6v6 tests now in order to give Blizzard the information required to make the best call on how to move forward with this. I think with Classic doing so well, it's probably likely that some version of either an Overwatch Retro Classic or a rotating 6v6 mode is going to be coming. I mean, it's doing too well for it not to. Let's see how the next season goes, though. We're going to have to be competing up against Marvel Rivals now, which also is just sort of like the actual sequel to the 6v6 ideology in a lot of ways, which makes me a little sad for this because it's like they waited the exact longest time to be too late in order to do this, to capture the intention. Like, it's good enough, I guess, but imagine if they would have done this like months ago. Anyway, let's get on to the Season 14 patch. Season 14 patch is now live. It brings Hazard immediately. Later on, we're going to be getting the 6v6 role queue events, the tests that you're definitely going to want to get playtime into for them to gather data on what to even make of the 6v6 idea for Overwatch 2. Mythic Reinhardt is going to be in the Battle Pass, as well as Winter Wonderland skins coming down the pipeline. Those are always cozy and interesting. Hero Mastery for Ashe comes as well, and the 6v6 role queue experiment. Some general global changes you're going to want to really pay attention to. The damage roll passive debuff duration has increased to 3 seconds. They've moved this number back and forth again, and the healing reduction also gets increased from 20 to 25%, so buffed in both cases. So that means tanks are going to struggle to hold the front line as long from taking any pressure whatsoever, essentially. Giving a bit of a buff to more of a divey playstyle. This probably makes Hazard a little bit better than he otherwise would be, even because he goes in and out of combat and can really get value playing that way. But also look out for this being effective when you're targeting supports who normally can heal each other a lot. Also, another major global change is to projectile sizes, where the hit scan radius of the larger projectiles are reduced from 0.08 to 0.07. The smaller to hit scans also go down from 0.05 to 0.04, and projectile radius on large projectiles goes down significantly from 0.15 to 0.12. Those really large projectiles like Pharah and Junkrat, who I was certainly taking advantage of, almost getting to Masters last season. If Marvel Rivals didn't come out, I would have made it. But those are all getting harder to hit. This is like a slight downscale of the big projectile and easy to hit damage from the Season 9 rework. It's not a complete revert as far as I understand it. I think a good way to understand what this is going to do for the whole meta of the game is to pull back the dominance of FPS heroes that are doing really well right now, just a bit, making it more about the characters that have abilities as opposed to the aim dominance that Widowmaker was evoking onto lobbies, or Pharah, low-key, one of the best heroes in the game. A lot of people didn't seem to realize that, but the damage being so consistent, landing and smacking into tanks or taking duels, it was really kind of overwhelming the power of the game and kind of changing up what was good. Like, I think to some degree, the very defensible support backline is partially due to the fact that the other supports were just kind of hard to get value on in comparison to how easy a lot of the damage picks otherwise would be. Now, I think it's safe to say that any ability that isn't aim-based is going to be a little bit stronger in the meta as a concept. Because while these numbers are hard to understand just from looking at them, basically, you're going to miss when you used to hit. Simple as that. So if an aim-based hero is just slightly less consistent than before, their overall performance goes down a lot, especially when you consider, well, that means less kills they're getting, less duels they're winning, as well as less ult, less everything, right? These really have ripple effects and makes the skill requirement to play a lot of those aim-dependent picks a bit higher than it was before. Keep in mind, the damage characters do get their passive buffed, but then again, that just means characters that are more consistent also take better advantage of that as opposed to ones that can miss. Onto the tank category now. Doomfist Seismic Slam shockwave range has been reduced from 18 to 15 meters, but the cooldown also goes up from 6 to 6.5. The recent increase to Rocket Punch Wall Slam has added a lot of consistency that made Doomfist significantly more threatening. To help account for this, we're pulling out some of the survivability from Seismic Slam. Sure. Okay. Doomfist gets significant nerfs. On to Hazard now. The dive character you probably should be playing because he's going to be forced in Season 14. He actually gets overall buffed here from before, which is interesting because there was a lot of debate on how strong he was or wasn't. But remember, they want to release heroes on the safe side of strong. So I think they're probably going to tune some of these things back. But Hazard gets a series of overall buffs from what you remember. The consistency of his primary attack Bone Spur goes up, where the damage per spike is increased up to 7.5. He shoots 10 pellets out of his shotgun and they can headshot, so that means you go from doing 135 max damage to 150. So 2 perfect headshots will do 300 damage. That's pretty important considering he was kind of struggling to do much damage with it before. And each volley center projectile no longer has a random launch spread and now always launches straight. So more consistent overall. Spike Guard, the angle of protection provided by Spike Guard is increased from 104 degrees to 180. So a full left-right complete block from the front, similar to other characters as well. I always thought that was a pretty big weakness I noticed, where it was like hard to pivot to make sure I'm blocking the right angle. Now it's pretty self-explanatory. Just anything from the left or right of you forward is going to be blocked with 180 degrees. That is a massive buff as far as I'm concerned, because it just means like the angles you're allowed to play and use his best ability are widened now, making him way more durable and harder to deal with. Because before, a little bit of mobility is something sidesteps you and it was just hitting you from the side, whether that is dealing reduced damage from the block taking it, or if you're bypassing the block, massive difference, okay? Now, he's way better now with just this change alone. Yes, they take some DPS out of Spike Guard. It did 75 ridiculous damage over time to an AoE. That was nuts. Now it's just 70. Hardly a nerf as far as I'm concerned. This, you're going to be using after you deal some damage anyway, because it's going to be reloading his gun as he uses it. So you normally would go aggressive, soften them up, then finish them with this, regardless, while surviving and probably trapping them against your wall. Violent Leap's post/recovery time for primary fire and quick melee has increased from 0.3 to 0.5 seconds. This is another one of those little nerfs where the follow-up on the combo is a little bit slower, and that's to account for the fact that his gun's a bit better, but overall, again, I still think he's getting significantly buffed from the last time you played him. Jagged Wall's health has been increased from 350 to 400. I happen to know they've played around with this number a lot, because should it be as strong as a May Pillar? Should it be weaker than that? But the knockback now has increased damage from 40 to 50, and the damage interval has increased from 1.5 seconds per target to 1.75 seconds per target. So that part of it's actually a nerf. That's the number of how quickly you can engage it again. So overall, it's a bit of a nerf in terms of like trapping something against it and hitting the wall repeatedly, because it won't proc as many times, but a little bit more spike damage, which means just the play of trapping something and comboing them together in one burst is better. Overall, you would rather have a bigger burst of damage up front in order to finish the target you're fighting, as opposed to more damage over time or to be more annoying and obnoxious. Probably a good change overall regardless, but certainly overall, when you add all these things together, his primary way to trap something down and lock it down is just better now. Downpour, which is his ultimate, airborne momentum lost by casting Downpour has been reduced from 90 to 50%, and the vault minimum obstacle height to trigger vault has reduced from 1.75 meters to 1.25 meters. This should allow Hazard to scale short obstacles more consistently, so it's just a little bit easier to latch onto things. The developers explain all this by saying the community feedback from Hazard's trial has been largely positive, and we've got some valuable data to improve his abilities' performance. We're adjusting his kit to increase the damage of his primary fire, making Bone Spur more consistent and reliable for finishing off enemies. Spike Guard protection sometimes felt inconsistent due to being used from a third-person perspective. Kind of a strange way to explain this, to be honest. To address this, we're widening the forward blocking angle, providing Hazard with more reliable protection. It's just way stronger, way more consistent, way better. I don't know. When they give explanations like this, it always is a bit of a head scratcher for me, but additionally, the damage of Spike Guard has been slightly reduced to balance the increased Bone Spur damage and protection radius. We're also strengthening the Jagged Wall to make it more impactful, while increasing the time required to re-trigger the knockback effect to minimize frustration from frequent knockbacks. Yeah, I think that's kind of accurate. That's probably the smartest part of the patch notes there. Mauga, base armor reduced down to 150, but the base health goes up to 425, just exchanging 50 armor for health. They love doing this on characters. It's a very common way for them to rearrange the stats of the game. It says, the overrun changes from the last patch have been great for enabling more active Mauga playstyles. We're converting some of his armor back to normal health to balance out some of the added survivability gained from the overrun changes. Okay, sure, hardly ever see Mauga personally. Orisa also gets a health switcheroo. The armor has been increased from 300 to 325, and the base health has been reduced from 175 to 150, but Terra Surge gets a significant 2-meter buff to the pull radius, which I think is actually like quite significant, honestly. They just keep buffing this ultimate. Although Orisa's effectiveness dropped off further than expected, the removal of the Fortify heat reduction mechanic has had a positive effect on gameplay, making her ammo resource more meaningful. We're keeping that change while walking back some of the armor health loss. We also think her Terra Surge ultimate ability could be more effective, so now it pulls enemies from further distance, but the damage range hasn't changed, so it will be harder to get out of the area. Yeah, okay, great. Ramattra, my boy Ram, getting a crazy buff. Ravenous Vortex now briefly interrupts horizontal momentum when first affecting a target. Slowing field now ignores barriers for line of sight, so you can use it against Reinhardt way better now. Before that, like any shield in the way, it would kind of make it pretty difficult to manipulate the front line, and it's going to interrupt horizontal momentum against a lot of characters that are very escapable, are going to hate playing against Ravenous Vortex all of a sudden. And basically, it wasn't very good as a lockdown tool. It was one of his more difficult and finicky abilities that just wasn't as strong as many other tank CCs, like really fair, basically. And maximizing its use certainly is a way that you get a lot more out of Ram, but Ram players know it's just not really that effective, so you have to just take high percentage uses of it rather than expect it to make a big play. But now that it removes horizontal momentum, well, there are certain characters that get screwed entirely with their escapes, especially. Like one of the stronger techs you can do is to try to put a Ravenous Vortex down on a Winston who's jumping away. That dominates a Winston. Now, generally not a great matchup for Ram, but that is one way that you can punish the Winston. Now, that also works against other heroes that will equally be trying to gain distance away from you once you start to brawl them out. So they mentioned Diva's boosters are Reinhardt's charge, but there's lots of other characters that also have horizontal mobility, which will be immediately interrupted, basically freezing them in place effectively. Like they can still move, but it's going to basically like take that movement cooldown away in the same way that you were already doing against the Winston leap. So trapping enemies at Ram, really, really good. Okay, Winston. Jump pack damage increased from 50 to 60 because numbers and reasons. Winston's leap now has a higher maximum damage to better reward accuracy when landing directly next to a target, though it still has damage fall off when landing further away. Okay. Damage category, Ashe's Coach Gun can now be activated while affected by mobility locking abilities, but won't move Ashe. The devs say there were some inconsistencies for when Coach Gun was disabled by mobility lock abilities. Now, Ashe will be able to activate Coach Gun while mobility is locked out, such as Junkrat's Steel Trap, to knock back enemies, but won't move herself. Okay, so when she's locked down, she can still knock things away. Makes sense to me. Pharah's Jet Dash cooldown has been nerfed to 9 seconds. Pharah is a difficult hero to deal with for many due to her high flying mobility and burst damage. We're reducing how often her horizontal movement cooldown is available to make it slightly more of a positioning commitment when used. She's just strong hero, very, very good, still very good. Having multiple movement options, one getting nerfed, not good enough. Like, honestly, the projectile changes and large projectiles getting the most severe nerf out of those reverts to the season 9 improvements. That's going to affect her a lot more than this, but overall, still probably a pretty decent character, because equally the hit scans to shoot her out of the sky are also worse as well. Soldier 76, Biotic Field's cooldown's been buffed again because reasons and numbers. 15 seconds, developers say Soldier could use a small increase to his effectiveness, and with changes to the damage roll passive, it's a good time to make his Biotic Field more available. So I guess because other damage dealers will nerf his healing more, they feel he should get buffed to compensate for that. But he's also one of the more consistent damage dealers in the game. So that means he's the type of character that is easy to hit, reliable, less of that burst skill shot, which I think gets nerfed more, as opposed, like if it's harder to hit shots, like in general across the whole game, a character that has a lot of chances to hit is better because we've re-engineered the power of the damage roll to be more about applying the DPS passive than hitting those bursts of impact. So Soldier already got buffs from that as a concept. Now he's getting buffs again in order to deal with getting shot at. Sometimes their logic is all over the place. It gets even worse, don't worry guys, because the railgun story with Sojourn. So Sojourn, railgun, the secondary fire damage scaling has increased up to 20 to 120 again. Keep in mind it does crit as well, of course, when it's at max charge. That's the whole point of the railgun. The developers say Sojourn has received adjustments to increase the rate of her energy gain and shifted some power into her disruptor shot ability recently. So that's with the last patch. Though the secondary fire lacking in impact undermines her core gameplay fantasy as the railgun hero. We're adding some damage back to it to keep a close eye on how powerful she is. We're adding some damage back to it and we'll keep a close eye on how powerful she ends up being. So guys, as it turns out, if you have a railgun hero and you nerf the railgun. The railgun identity of the railgun hero won't be as good with the railgun. So if we buff the railgun, then she'll have more of a railgun so that the railgun can railgun. Who could have saw that coming? Geez, sometimes the balance, like the community asked for this, so we can't really be mad at the devs, because with like shouts of demands of change to happen, we just get the dog chasing its tail, chasing a car, chasing itself in a big circle, and before we know it, we're gonna have the whole season 9 thing reverted, because they're already starting to go away from it, and we're gonna get burst damage and snipers again. Just wait. Okay, Symmetra's teleporter has been buffed where the base shield health has increased from 200 to 250, because according to the devs, Symmetra is performing quite well, but we'd like to further enable team play around an interesting ability like teleporter, making it more difficult to destroy. I hate this. It's already pretty good. Why let it exist longer? I don't like this. They're saying Symmetra's doing fine, but we want to buff this because Torbjorn, the turret, now build time has been reduced by half of a second. It builds in 2.5 seconds now, and its health goes up because turrets and teleporters and deployables need more health. We want to shoot the turrets longer. It's one of my favorite damage heroes. I looked at my playtime recently. He's in my top like 10 heroes played. Love Torbjorn. Don't want to buff him, except for this. The next one is Forge Hammer's damage has been increased. It was 55 back, prior to season 9. One of the things that they probably just forgot to buff with the health changes. Now it's up to 70, which I think is incredibly important, because getting those goofy Forge Hammer kills is, every Torb player's dream. The developers say, we like to make the turret more effective without increasing its damage. It now builds more quickly to better enable repositioning it for faster paced gameplay. Fast paced turret gameplay, guys. Flanking turrets. Why? What? Okay, we're also fixing a grievous oversight from moving to larger health pools, and Torbjorn's Forge Hammer will now strike fear into his enemies once again. The best patch note I've ever read, okay? This is the best part of the whole patch. Right. Venture's drill dash cooldown rate is now faster anytime burrow is active, rather than requiring the player to be underground. The devs say this is mostly a quality of life change that makes Venture's cooldown cycle more consistent, as they tend to activate burrow while soaring through the air quite often. Support, Baptiste regenerative burst cooldown has decreased from 15 to 14, but the radius gets 2 meters, and it's really large. It's, it's a sphere. So 2 meters in a sphere is nuts. Adjusting the values of regenerative burst will increase Baptiste's self-survivability while also providing greater support to his teammates. No kidding. Wow. Because we've got characters that are already nuts, like Juno, just incredible, really good Overwatch 2 hero, a static style support like this needs nutso stats. He's already good. Bap's already good on a lot of maps. Already a really dominant hero. Just the game is faster, and this is buffing a character that just does. And again, with the turrets and all of this, these slower playstyle characters don't need buffs. They don't really need buff. This isn't their meta, right? So I hate when they do stuff like this. Brig, this patch probably pretty required, I think, for higher tiers of play. But Brig, very controversial character. Inspire duration reduced from 5 to 4 seconds. The devs say the duration has been reduced to limit Brig's Inspire uptime, while the healing per second remains unchanged, ensuring the healing output is unaffected when Inspire is triggered or consistently. But a lot of times Brig needs to run away from melee range to activate Inspire. So while hitting flails consistently is still going to basically get you the same amount of Inspire as before, it makes Brig far less viable overall, especially against counters, because you can't stay in as long and expect it to passively heal your whole team. This is a very big nerf, okay? They're making it seem like, well, it's pretty much going to be the same. No, it's only the same if you're constantly hitting melees, which, unless the enemy is one of my Wrecking Ball teammates that wants to fight a Brig constantly, generally it's kind of difficult, because Brig should be getting poked out by most things, and you should make it difficult for the Brig to constantly land Inspire. If you're doing that, you're just sort of feeding as far as I'm concerned. Illari gets a buff where Captive Sun's explosion radius is increased from 8 to 12 meters. The devs say Illari's Captive Sun can be difficult to use effectively due to enemies' ability to dodge its effects. Increasing the radius will improve the consistency and overall value of the ultimate. I think it's interesting that they're buffing this, because when this character came out, everyone was like, this is the strongest support ult we've ever seen. And then we figured out, well, a lot of things can eat it. Genji can deflect it. You can hear it coming and run away. Now we have to buff it because the player base learned how to outplay it. Kind of interesting. That's the way it works. Also, of course, we got more speed in the game, so kiting it became much more effective. Speaking of kiting, we've got Lucio, the final patch note of Season 14. The sound barrier now falls faster when used mid-air, so you can drop the beat even more quickly and react as you need to against certain ultimates. I think this is a bad change because activating save ults without the downside is not as fun as needing to time it or be aware or all of those things. But in general, Overwatch 2 wants to amp up the speed and reliability of things. So this is another thing where it's like, well, imagine it like this. Why does he even need to do the animation then? Why can't he just cast it instantly? Because it's less fun and interesting, and there's ways that you can outplay it and stun it, and so that having counterplay is interesting texture. But if you're going to make it and just speed it up, then what's the point of it needing a wind-up? The whole point of the wind-up is to build tension of like, are you going to land it in time or not? Crossfade's self-healing penalty has decreased from 60 to 40%. The devs say the adjustment to Lucio's health pool has impacted his survivability in fights. Remember, he got the lower overall health, which was pretty important because a lot of the mobility characters got that, and still mobility is pretty darn good. So this change will increase his durability in combat by improving his self-healing capabilities. Additionally, sound barrier now falls faster while midair, enabling more reactive and safer use from higher positions. I'm not too worried about Lucio. It's just Juno is more consistent and has a higher skill ceiling and a grindier ult. Like, there just isn't a lot of things where sound barrier is obviously the best answer to things. Because Juno already has a really good speed option, that already gives you a way to outplay ults. So even though she's in theory doesn't have the same defensive ults possible with her ultimate, you kind of don't need it because the ult is so grindy anyway. It's going to guarantee you some offense, so you can just play it to grind out certain fights and dodge the ones that you're going to lose that you would need, quote unquote, sound barrier to withstand. And besides, a lot of the overwhelming combos outplay sound barrier nowadays anyway. Season 14 now live, guys. Let me know what your thoughts on this new patch is in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.